This is my advanced portfolio evaluation question for how did you use media technologies in construction, research, planning and evaluation stages?
Kick it! Let's start the party!
Enough about the decorations, alright? Cheers.
At the beginning of the course, my skills in both Photoshop and InDesign were pretty much non-existent. I hadn't had much experience in Photoshop and I haven't had any experience in InDesign. So when it came to the beginning of the course, I wanted to develop my skills so that I could research, plan and create my products. This would be crucial to me since the brief told me that I had to make my products look as realistic as possible. Some of my skills were only simple, things like editing text and moving text. These are simple skills which I learned on other softwares that I used in the past. Other than this, however, there wasn't much that I knew, and I made it my task to learn. After completing my first preliminary task, I had much more of an understanding with the workings and tools that could be used in Photoshop and InDesign. One example of how I improved was by learning to insert and edit images. This kind of skill is very important in both my portfolios, since I would be able to make better looking research material and then I would be able to transfer these skills across to the creation of my preliminary exercises. There are a lot of different lessons and skills I had to take into consideration when using and learning to use the different technologies, both hardware and software. In the beginning, I had no experience with the hardware which I was going to be using, for example the DSLR cameras. I hadn't had any experience with these kind of cameras before and this was my first time using one. So when it came to actually using the cameras, I had to learn a lot of different skills and techniques in order to get the most out of my photos. I need to make sure I develop my skills so that my pictures for my main product will look more professional and I'll be able to make them look as good as possible. I think that in the end I did manage to learn all the skills and techniques that I would require for my preliminary exercise. For Photoshop and InDesign, however, these were pieces of software I did manage to learn bits about. One of the biggest lessons I learned was creating and making shapes, and objects which suited the product. I had to do this kind of thing in order to create connotations and conventions within both my magazine and in my ancillaries during my A2 advanced portfolio. While this may sound like a really simple skill, this did lead on to me learning other skills later on in the future. By the time I completed my main task, I think that my skills in Photoshop and InDesign had greatly improved. I learned a lot about the different tools and functions available on each of the softwares, and also how I could use them effectively within my main product. I think that my skills in Photoshop, however, did surpass the skills I had in InDesign. In InDesign, my skills were a lot more basic. I still had a lot of things to learn, such as the different tools and how I could use them. I think that if I do progress my skills using InDesign, I'll be able to make better looking products. There are a number of different lessons I learned by the time I finished my main task. One of the lessons was backing up my work. While this is something that wouldn't directly affect the outcome of an overall level of the work, it was something I learned due to the fact that the programs I was using were prone to fail. If this did happen, I would have to redo all of the progress that I already made. Another big lesson I learned about the software was compatibility. A lot of the images and imported files I could use and edit in Photoshop could not be imported onto InDesign. This meant that my choice of pictures and shapes on InDesign were a lot more basic and a lot more remedial compared to the ones I had on my Photoshop. During A2, one of the lessons I learned about Adobe Premiere was to also constantly save. There was a number of different clips and files being used at once, so we had to make sure there wasn't any loss in progress. Another lesson I learned was research, using YouTube video tutorials to learn how to use different tools and functions in the most efficient way to make my film look as good as possible. I think that by the time I created my short film, one of the key lessons I learned was to always have more than one shot. The camera we used had more than enough storage to do this, and most of the times we found ourselves with a shortage of footage or just lackluster content. I think that one of the biggest advantages to the technologies that I used was the variation in detail. I could use a camera for a number of different photos, however I learned that depending on the picture, the mode of the camera would change in order to suit the environment. This was helpful to me since it's an automatic process and it basically made my pictures much better. A disadvantage to the cameras, however, was that they took some effort in order to understand. By this I mean that I couldn't really use them to their full capabilities as I was mainly relying on the auto function. This has been my evaluation question 4 by Jamie Mangan.